So the Las Vegas Raiders have officially finalized their practice squad, and we're going to talk about some of the guys that made the roster for the Raiders, specifically the practice squad. There's one guy that kind of got left off, which surprised a lot of people given the Raiders just drafted him. And of course, Thayer Munford has officially been cut. And we're going to talk about what this means for the Raiders as we kind of go forward. Let's get into it, man. A lot of interesting things kind of coming out here. So, of course, you guys see the list of players that the Raiders have decided they're going to, end up keeping on the practice squad. Alex Bachman, Chris Collier, Terrell Edmonds, Jafari Harvey, Shedrick Jackson. And you guys just kind of see the list. Some of these guys we already knew the Raiders wanted to bring back. For example, yesterday, Ryan McFadden told us that Greedy Vance and JT Woods are two guys the Raiders were waiving, but if they clear waivers, they would bring back. Ryan McFadden is the guy that covers the Raiders for ESPN. I think he just started as well. The guy does a phenomenal job. Go check him out on Twitter if you guys don't already follow him. But the Raiders obviously felt like this group right here gives us the most potential. And with this, they also had to make some tough decisions. And one of those guys that they ended up essentially just letting go was wide receiver Tommy Mellott. Mellott obviously got drafted in the 6th round, right? Him and Cam Miller were back-to-back picks. And the Raiders had kind of decided that, hey, we're going to just roll forward with obviously Cam Miller as the quarterback and these 3 guys over here at the wide receiver position. And 2 of these 3 guys, I'm not even 100% sold on. The Alex Bachman's one of them. Shedrick Jackson, absolutely love him. And then Justin Shorter is the 3rd wide receiver the Raiders decided to keep. Now, what's interesting about this is, you could have predicted who the top 5 wide receivers for the Raiders were going to be. I think it was just common sense based off of like the capital that was kind of put into these guys. I'd say top 4 wide receivers. And of course, the 5th guy was kind of surprising, but the Raiders signed him 2 days ago. Amari Cooper, may have been yesterday. They signed Amari Cooper. You knew who those top tier guys were going to be, but then if you said we're going to put 3 more wide receivers on the practice squad, I would have definitely said Tommy Mellott's going to be one of those guys. And after preseason, Shedrick Jackson flashed, I would have said he would be another one of those guys. But at no point did I think Justin Shorter was going to make the Raiders practice squad. And even Alex Bachman, especially over Tommy Mellott, given that the Raiders drafted this guy. You knew what you had in Tommy Mellott when you ultimately made that decision to draft him. He's Hunter Renfrow. He might be a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, but he's basically Hunter Renfrow. That's the type of wide receiver you're bringing in. You're bringing in a guy that has to develop at wide receiver. He has to still continue to kind of get better. But the guy didn't flash at all. And I don't even know if he had a catch this preseason. He may have had 1 catch in the final game. But the guy was awful in my opinion. And, he wasn't ever going to go back to being a quarterback because the Raiders didn't draft him to be a quarterback. And I don't think any other team would have probably drafted him to be quarterback either. But the Raiders decided that Alex Bachman, he gives you like that veteran, not leadership, but like he's more of a veteran than a rookie wide receiver in Tommy Mellott. And of course, Shedrick Jackson flashed. So there was no way you weren't going to bring him back. And then, of course, they found something in Justin Shorter, so they decided to kind of keep him around as well. Another guy the Raiders decided they weren't going to bring back, and I think this one's still kind of shocking to me, is Andre Carter. Carter looked good in preseason, and I'm surprised that not only was he not claimed, but he hasn't even signed yet. And maybe he will at some point today, right? Keep in mind, we don't actually know. Obviously, the Raiders were not able to bring Andre Carter back to the practice squad, but we don't even know if another team may have actually reached out, right? The practice squad, these guys are signing with the Raiders for the practice squad. So these guys could easily say, hey, I'm good. I don't want to come to the Raiders. I'd rather go to a different team. Sincere McCormick, as an example, went to the 49ers. The Raiders wanted him back, but McCormick decided I'm going to go to a different team, which made sense for him. And I'm actually glad that McCormick chose to go to the 49ers. Obviously, selfishly, it would have made sense for him to come to the Raiders. But for him, the opportunity he might get, like it takes one opportunity for a guy to flash, and then he may be the starting running back. Of course, he's not going to beat out Christian McCaffrey today, but in like 2 years, who knows what McCormick could look like. And I like him as a running back, so hopefully he has success with the 49ers as he kind of goes forward. But my point in saying that is players get to decide where they want to go. If they're not claimed from the waivers, they get to ultimately decide. And we don't know if Andre Carter has decided that, hey, I don't want to be with the Raiders anymore. I want to kind of go to a separate team and potentially develop with another roster. There's a chance that he may end up signing with someone, so we'll see if that ends up happening. But I'm going to be honest, I think Andre Carter has so much upside and potential, and I'm actually surprised that the Raiders kind of let him go. Carter, I think, was, he kind of reminded me of like Arden Key as an example, right? It's a guy who came, early on in his career. He always kind of flashed, but he wasn't able to finish plays, but he ended up having like an 8, 9, 10-year career. I don't even know what year Arden Key's at this point in his NFL career. I don't know. I think it was 2018 draft is when we brought him in. But Key was a solid football player, and he's kind of just slowly developed. And Carter kind of fits that same mold where he's skinny, but he's long and he's explosive and he's quick and he's a pass rusher. So we'll see what he kind of develops into as he kind of goes forward. But I think for the Raiders, you have to figure out your pass rush. Obviously, we brought in Brendan Jackson earlier today, right? We picked him up off the waivers. So hopefully he can develop for the Raiders as a pass rusher. But I also want to see some of the other guys step up. I want to see Charles Snowden really take that step. This is his third year with the Raiders. There's no point of being here if you can't actually, in a live situation, develop into a key contributor for the Raiders. I don't expect him to be like a superstar, but Tyree Wilson on every third down is going to jump into that 3 technique. And if Malcolm Koonce or Maxx Crosby miss any playing snaps, or if they need to come off to the sideline and it's third down, Charles Snowden is that next man up. Snowden will probably play 300 or 400 snaps for the Raiders this season, so I need to see this guy really get out there and flash something. Because I think Andre Carter, flashed, and given he's only in his third season, I think he had a lot of upside. But just getting back to this list here, another guy that made the list that I'm actually happy made the list is going to be Chris Collier. He was a guy that I talked a lot about. He really, really, really flashed in preseason. The guy was impressive, in my opinion. The guy had multiple carries, right? I said, that guy looks good. The vision he had was really, really impressive. And I want to see what this guy can continue to do with the Raiders as he kind of goes forward. And I'll also just throw this out there. I'm not sold on Zamir White. I'm not sold on Raheem Mostert. Yes, I understand the Raiders are going to roll with him as like RB2, RB3. And Zamir White might be RB2 or maybe might be Mostert. We'll see what kind of happens. But I think Chris Collier has more upside than both those guys at this point. Obviously, both guys are probably, I shouldn't say both. Raheem Mostert may be a better running back than Chris Collier. But Raheem Mostert's on the downward trend. Zamir White, I think he's kind of peaked out when we know what he is as a running back. I think Chris Collier has more upside. Now, will he reach that upside? We'll see what ends up happening. Another guy the Raiders brought back, and not surprising, but I almost thought the Raiders let this guy go. Terrell Edmunds. Edmunds, really like his tape, man. I'm telling you guys, watching his tape, he was impressive. He was out there. I noticed right away this guy was flashing pretty much from the first play he came into the game. Multiple tackles. The guy was in position. He was feeling his run fit. I think for the Raiders, Terrell Edmunds is a guy that's going to end up playing a lot for us soon, right? Sooner rather than later. And keep in mind, although he's on the practice squad, Terrell Edmunds will play a lot for the Raiders. So although you're on the practice squad, you will have that opportunity to be carried into the game. And remember, when players are carried into the game that are on practice squad, you will have, I believe it's 2 players that you can protect. The rest of the guys you end up bringing in, you have to technically waive them and then re-sign them back to the practice squad. And during that waiver period, other teams can steal those guys. We've lost guys in the past with this rule, essentially. But the Raiders will keep Terrell Edmunds, and they'll probably protect him as they bring him up to the active roster for game days. Glad Terrell Edmunds is back. I think he has potential for the Raiders. And by potential, I mean he'll actually start and play some meaningful snaps for the Raiders. Another guy the Raiders kept, Jafari Harvey. This one's interesting because Harvey never really flashed. In the Raiders open practice that happened, Jafari Harvey had 2 snaps. If you guys remember, when we broke down the practice clips, he had 2 plays that he made. And in those 2 plays, we said, damn, this guy looks good. He has some movement. He has some potential. He never really flashed any of that in the 2 preseason games he actually played. Now, he didn't play against the Seahawks for whatever reason, but he played in weeks 2 and 3. And I didn't really see anything from this guy to say, let's keep him. Again, I'm surprised the Raiders kept him over Andre Carter. Just doesn't make sense to me. There has to be something there with Carter potentially signing with another football team. Either way, Jafari Harvey is also here. Matt Jones flashed a little bit for the Raiders. Trayvon Maye had 2 sacks in the preseason. Antonio Mafi, veteran, solid football player, will be a contributor for the Raiders at some point. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting carried into the actual games every single week. We'll have Dylan Parham, Jackson Powers Johnson, and Alex Kappa as I think the 3 main guards. I don't know how much trust they're going to have in Caleb Rogers. I could see them bringing up Mafi and saying, you're going to be the fourth guard that we're going to kind of rely on. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. Cam Miller, not surprised. Carter Runyan, we talked about this in the video earlier. Laki Tassi is officially back with the Raiders. Now, Tossi's a fan favorite. A lot of people really like what this guy kind of flashed. I think he still has to develop, right? He's not ready to go out there and actually, play real meaningful snaps for the Raiders. Like, if you put Chris Jones on Laki Tassi, Chris Jones would smoke him at this point, based off of just like technique and fundamentals. But I do like the fact that the Raiders are bringing him in. He will fall under the IPP program. So, we'll see what ends up happening there. Trey Taylor's brought back to the Raiders. Not a huge fan of Trey Taylor. Hasn't really flashed much. Same with JT Woods. Not a huge fan. I feel like the preseason hype and the training camp hype with JT Woods was a lot higher than the actual tape, right? The tape did not back up anything with what we were hearing in the preseason. Or I should say in the camp specifically. Grudy Vance, tape backs it up. The guy's going to be a good football player. He just has to continue to develop. Vance, to me, kind of has like that Nate Hobbs in him, where Nate Hobbs was really good as like, I'm going to blitz, I'm going to play the run, I'm going to tackle, and I'm going to do those type of things. Outside of coverage, which Grudy Vance isn't great in coverage at this point, and Nate Hobbs was never great in coverage either. Everything else these guys do a really good job at. Coverage is going to be the one thing they'll have to kind of develop. So we'll keep an eye on Grudy Vance as he goes forward. I think he'll also be called up at some point this season from the practice squad. And the Raiders, of course, decided to keep Dalton Wagner, which takes us into the next topic. So Dalton Wagner hits the practice squad, and the Raiders are actually waiving offensive tackle Thayer Munford, which is surprising to me that the Raiders waited to waive him, a day later, essentially. Now, I'm not sure if this means the Raiders are potentially bringing him to the practice squad. Maybe they just wanted every other team to, hey, fill up your rosters, look at the extra guys. We don't want anyone to steal Thayer Munford from us, right? We plan to waive him. We plan to bring him back to the practice squad. The fact that the Raiders waited until a day later tells me that they actually want to keep this guy. And we'll see if that actually ends up happening. We'll see if the Raiders plan to keep Thayer Munford. We waived him, which means he'll hit the claimer, or he'll hit the waiver wire tomorrow. And if there's a team out there that needs an offensive tackle, someone might actually pick Munford up. Now, I'll be honest with you guys. I do not want Munford on the Raiders. I just don't think he's a good offensive tackle. Truth be told, there's a lot of good offensive tackles that were available on the waiver that the Raiders could have easily picked up. Guys with real upside. Carter Warren, as an example, was with the Jets. I forget what team claimed him. I think it was the Falcons that may have claimed him, and he might start for the Falcons. Like, I would not be surprised if Carter Warren, former third-round pick out of Pitt, I think this is his third year in the NFL, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up starting potentially for the Falcons, given their right tackle is going to be out for the season. They're trying to figure out who's going to start for them. It's kind of similar to where the Raiders are right now. If Colt Miller was knocked out for the rest of the season, the Raiders would be scrambling to figure out who's going to start at that offensive tackle position. And the Falcons are kind of in that same boat. And I think for the Raiders, if you wanted to get a different offensive tackle, if you wanted to target someone else, you could have potentially already done that. Carter Warren was available. Esopo was available. Dan Skipper is technically still available. There's a couple other guys that got waived that I would consider if I'm the Raiders. And for the Raiders to waive Thayer Munford, again, it wasn't the day of the initial cuts. And this stuff right here is done by design, right? The Raiders look at it like this. Hey, if we release Thayer Munford with all the other guys, well, teams will get to look and say, hey, Thayer Munford has just become available. Let's cut, whatever player it is on our roster, and let's pick up Thayer Munford. Here's the thing. It is hard to cut any player at this point. Getting down to 53 guys is hard enough in itself. But to say we need to cut, player X or player Y and go pick up this guy that's not even been on our roster, it's a hard thing to do at this point. So the Raiders waiting until the next day to waive Thayer Munford means, to me at least, they want him back. But we'll see if that actually ends up happening. He wasn't at practice for the Raiders today, which I think is also because the Raiders plan to waive him, and you can't have him at practice if you're going to waive him that same day. So Munford obviously was not at practice for the Raiders today. If you guys remember, the Raiders tried doing this with Byron Young. I believe it was last year when they waived him, and they wanted to bring him back, but they waived him a day after all the initial cuts. And the Eagles still ended up claiming him off the waivers, and the Eagles, I think, had like the 31st or 30th that's kind of where they're at in terms of like the order. And they ended up taking him. So we'll see if the Raiders bring back Munford. I wouldn't hate the idea of bringing him back, but I think for the Raiders, Charles Grant has so much more potential and upside. Charles Grant actually flashed like real upside. The guy has elite movement. Thayer Munford doesn't, and I think that alone right there is why you should just kind of go forward with Grant. If you can't move as an offensive tackle, you will not have success in the NFL. It's just the easiest thing to see. If a guy can move, he'll have a chance. If he can't, he has no chance. Trent Brown, for example, the offensive tackle the Raiders used to have, he's the exception to this rule. Every other offensive tackle that's ever come out that's like just slow-footed and can't really move, they've always just busted out. DeJuan Jones, people are like, he has the best tape coming out of college. The guy ended up being a 4th-round pick, and I think he's pretty. I don't know if he was released, but I think he'll be released within the next year or so. I just don't see it with him. Thayer Munford, very similar, right? They're guys that can't really move. We'll see what ends up happening, but Thayer Munford was cut. I think the Raiders have to just kind of figure out that offensive tackle position, but I wouldn't mind just letting it be Charles Grant at this point. The guy has real upside to be a great tackle, right? So we'll see if he can kind of develop. We get a first look at Amari Cooper. You're going to see in this video, he's just stretching, but he's out there wearing number 19. So he was, I believe, 87 as he came to practice for the first time yesterday. Or at least that was the initial number they kind of assigned him. And after the cuts, obviously number 19 became available and Amari Cooper took that number. Another thing with Amari Cooper to kind of keep in mind is, this guy's motivated, and you can kind of tell from the presser he did yesterday. This guy's motivated. He still feels like, hey, I have that juice left to be successful. I can still be a great football player. I can still win one-on-ones out there. And he did have success. I was watching some of his tape from last season. The guy could still separate. Now, he's not the same separator. I'll be honest, guys. He's not the same wide receiver he once was. When he was here with the Raiders initially, the guy was an elite route runner. Just quicker, faster, and the movement was absolutely elite. He doesn't have that same movement anymore, but the guy in a one-on-one situation can still separate. And I think for the Raiders, you have to have a wide receiver that can separate. I look at the group we have right now, and although I think Dante Thornton will be a great wide receiver at some point, he's not really that today because he's not an elite separator at this point. He's a guy that just kind of out-jumps people. And until he learns to run real routes, until he learns to separate, he won't have the success that I think a lot of people think he's going to have, right? And even more so than that, I think Amari Cooper will help some of these younger guys. Jack Bech, we need him to develop. I think Amari Cooper can help him fine-tune his route running a little bit. And Cooper mentioned it yesterday, right? That he's here to kind of be that veteran leader in the locker room. And I should also state this, you guys are obviously watching this video right now. Shout out to Jakobi Meyers for actually being out there. Jakobi Meyers was out there. He's still practicing, even though he's, quote unquote, requested a trade, which makes me actually think that he might actually be here this season, right? There's a chance Jakobi Meyers is not going anywhere, given the fact he is still out there practicing. And I love to see this. I think Jakobi Meyers is a really good wide receiver, and I always say this, and some people think this is me trashing Jakobi. It's not. We can be honest. Jakobi Meyers is not an elite separator, an elite route runner, an elite. He's not elite at a whole lot of different things, right? He doesn't have elite speed, but the guy's just really good at so many different things. He just knows how to win. He knows how to, he has elite hands, so I'll give him that. And he just knows how to play the wide receiver position. And I think there's definitely a benefit to having those type of players. But having a guy like Jakobi and Amari kind of being on the opposite side, you have a guy who can on one end win those tough catches in Jakobi. On the other side, Amari Cooper can still separate, especially if he's in a one-on-one situation. He can beat most corners. I think the Raiders having those two wide receivers out there together on the same field at the same time is going to benefit this offense a lot. Also, don't overlook the fact that Amari Cooper has had the most success, so much success in the NFL. He will actually help teach some of the younger wide receivers. Trey Tucker and Jack Bech and Dante Thornton will actually get better watching Amari Cooper. Again, no offense to Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers is not an elite route runner. He's not an elite separator. And, Amari Cooper, he might not be that today, but he was at one point, and he knows mentally how to separate. So hopefully he can teach some of these other wide receivers how to run legit routes, how to get open. Amari Cooper's contract details have also come out. His contract is a 1-year, $4 million contract. So it's a great signing for the Raiders. Only $4 million. It's a low risk, high upside type of deal. And also, if Amari Cooper, if he has like 12 catches this season, he's just a really bad football player, doesn't make any sort of impact. It's only $4 million. It's really not. There's no way you can look at Amari Cooper and say, hey, that was a terrible signing given it was only $4 million. Now, if you paid him like 12, 13, 14, 15 million, that's completely different. But at the amount of money you're giving Cooper, I think it's a great signing for the Raiders. And this really does benefit the Raiders wide receivers given that they're so young. So we'll see what ends up happening as we kind of go forward. Let's wrap it up, man. One final thing that I want to just kind of touch on. So this one's kind of rumor based, but it's kind of interesting because, Benjamin Albright is a guy who covers the Denver Broncos, but this guy has legit inside information. And he said something very interesting in a tweet. So one of the Broncos fans out there asked him a question. He said, is there any truth that there's a trade in place between the Green Bay Packers and the Cowboys for Micah Parsons? So if you guys have not heard this, Ricky, who's an NFL insider, right? He's the guy that initially broke Amari Cooper to the Raiders back in like April or May. He said that the Raiders and Amari Cooper had kind of met, and don't be surprised if there's a reunion down the line. He's a guy that's broken so many different news stories. He actually put it out there saying that the Cowboys and the Packers have, they haven't agreed to a trade, but the Packers and Micah Parsons representatives have agreed that, we will agree to a $45 million per year contract. Ricky put that out yesterday by saying that the Packers and Micah Parsons have essentially agreed to compensation per year. Now, he didn't say that the Cowboys and Packers had agreed to a trade, but he did say that they had discussed it. So Benjamin Albright says something interesting. He says, Dallas has had calls from several teams that include the Green Bay Packers, which obviously Ricky told us yesterday, but he also said the Las Vegas Raiders apparently have also reached out. He does say that the Dallas Cowboys have not had any discussions with anyone, but he's saying that other teams have reached out to the Cowboys. So Benjamin Albright is basically saying that the Las Vegas Raiders actually called the Dallas Cowboys to see if they could potentially make a trade for Micah Parsons. This is interesting for a couple different reasons. First, I didn't ever feel like the Raiders definitely needed to upgrade their pass rushers. Never felt that we needed to make that type of jump. It's different if your pass rush sucks, which if you guys go back to like 2018, 2019, the Raiders pass rush was garbage, which was why we invested in Cleveland Farrell and even Maxx Crosby in that class. Our pass rush was really poor. We needed Micah Parsons that year. But this year we don't. We have a good pass rush. We have good pass rushers. But if there's truth to this that the Raiders actually reached out to Micah Parsons, that's absolutely wild to think. Because I don't think we need a pass rusher like that, given it's going to cost so much money. But could you guys imagine if the Raiders actually made this move happen? Imagine the pass rush with Maxx Crosby on the left, Micah Parsons on the right, Adam Butler, Tyree Wilson, Malcolm Koonce. How do you block those 4 or 5 guys out there? All 4 or 5 of those guys can basically win against most guys that they'd go up against. Of course, Tyree Wilson's kind of the exception, but you line him up against most centers or guards, he can bull rush them back into the quarterback. How do you block that? And if there's truth to this, imagine if the Raiders are actually able to make this happen. Of course, it's going to cost you a lot to be able to bring him in, but we paid Christian Wilkins a shit ton of money. That cap that we gave to Christian Wilkins is going to clear up over the next year. Micah Parsons is under contract this year, so if you made a trade for him, he's already under contract. But next year, the Christian Wilkins cap dollars kind of open up, and the extension would start as of next year. Imagine if the Raiders can actually make this work. I think this would absolutely take us over the top. And, I do have personal opinions about having that good of a pass rush. I don't think it works out all the time. I still think you need to have an elite offense, and you need an elite defensive coordinator, which is Patrick Graham, Pete Carroll an elite combination? I don't know. I know Vic Fangio's an elite defensive coordinator. I know Steve Spagnuolo is an elite defensive coordinator. I know Robert Saleh is an elite defensive coordinator because these guys have proven it. And Pete Carroll's had success in the past. Don't get it wrong, but this guy's had defensive, teams that rank like in the bottom 10 in the NFL multiple years. So Yeah, I know Pete Carroll's had success, and this is a Pete Carroll defense. This is no longer a Patrick Graham defense. But could you guys imagine Micah Parsons and Maxx Crosby? It's just an interesting thought. We'll see if it actually happens. It's probably not going to happen. But let me know what you guys think, man. How do you guys feel about the Raiders practice squad? How do you guys feel about Tommy Mellott? Even Thayer Munford being waived. Do you guys think he ends up coming back? And then how do you guys feel about the Cooper signing, the Jacoby Myers situation? Of course, what about Micah Parsons? Let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys all have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.